Welcome everyone. You are listening to the account with a news report for day 347 on the war in Ukraine. Thank you for tuning in. News today picked up again. I have two extra segments. For once, we had a missile strike on Kharkiv. While the damage was minor, there were enough updates to put it into its own segment. Additionally, Oleksiy Reznikov, Defense Minister of Ukraine, gave a lengthy and interesting briefing today. I also have an article by The Guardian I want to point out. The rest of the news updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and the international developments. First, though, the flashpoints along the front. Bilohorivka. Russia has claimed they captured the settlement. However, there has been absolutely no evidence provided. The General Staff of Ukraine reported a repelled attack around Shipilivka, north of Bilohorivka. Serhiy Haidai, head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, dismissed the Russian claims of capturing Bilohorivka. Bakhmut. Ukrainian reinforcements have been deployed around Bakhmut to contain the Russian advances. Counterattacks by these reinforcements around Blahodatne were called a success. South of Bakhmut, attacks were repelled around Klishchivka and Ivanivske, according to the General Staff of Ukraine. This is interesting since Russia has to bypass Klishchivka either to the south or north in order to attack Ivanivske. The situation inside Bakhmut is tense as Russia has now advanced into the northern, eastern and southern areas. According to Yevgeny Prigozhin, fierce battles are ongoing in Bakhmut. Every street, every house, every staircase is defended by Ukrainian soldiers. No one is retreating. Vuhledar. Ukrainian sources claim that hundreds of Russian soldiers from the 155th Guards Naval Brigade either surrendered or were captured. Before we start the news, here's the article by The Guardian I wanted to point out, titled, "We killed 3 Russians. The secretive Ukrainian special forces taking the fight across the border." The journalists claim that they have spoken to 3 Ukrainian Special Forces soldiers, 23-year-old Taras, 21-year-old Vladislav, and their commander, 39-year-old Oleksiy. The military says that in case the worst happens, the Ukrainian government will deny any knowledge of them. They are members of the Brotherhood Battalion, a volunteer group of Ukrainian Special Forces fighting Vladimir Putin deep in Russia. Their work ranges from the kidnapping of senior Kremlin officials to the destruction of key military infrastructure and the downing of enemy aircraft on Russian territory. The Guardian adds that because of their unofficial status, their stories could not be independently verified, but they are convincing and credible. And to start the news segment, a look at the Kharkiv Missile attack. Russia has attacked central Kharkiv with 2 S-300 missiles today. The number of people injured in the missile attacks has risen to 5 people, as emergency service workers are clearing the rubble. One of the missiles struck the Kharkiv University, severely damaging a building. Moving on to the briefing by the Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov. The Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov will likely be dismissed from his ministerial post next week and replaced by Kirilo Budanov, head of Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, government and military sources claimed. Later today, Reznikov said during a briefing that he was ready to step down if President Volodymyr Zelensky ordered his dismissal. During the briefing, he also announced that Ukraine's partners will supply Ukraine with aircrafts, however which type is not decided yet, and that Ukraine will not use the weapons provided by its Western partners for strikes on Russian territory. Reznikov also stated that Israel has promised to supply Ukraine with the missile and drone alert system. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, mentioned that he is reconsidering the previous government's decision to not supply Ukraine with the Iron Dome system. Reznikov also warned of the upcoming anniversary of the Russian invasion on February 24th and explained that Ukraine is expecting a Russian offensive since the Kremlin likes to use symbolic dates for propaganda. Currently, however, Ukraine has no information on the formation of strike groups in Belarus capable to strike at Kyiv. Now for a look at all the minor news out of Ukraine. Ukrainian servicemen have left for training after France and Italy approved to deliver Italian-French SAMPT air defense systems, also known as Mamba, to Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, about 280,000, or 40%, of consumers in Odesa do not have electricity after a fire broke out at a substation. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. Petro Andriushchenko, the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, once again published information on the ongoing demolition of Mariupol. This time, the Khmelnytsky Boulevard in the central district has been demolished. The National Resistance Center reported that Russian forces have seized Ukrainian books from libraries and schools in the occupied eastern Luhansk Oblast and burned them in heating plants. The center further stated that Russian proxies in Luhansk Oblast discussed sending Ukrainian children to the Republic of Karelia in Russia for so-called rest and rehabilitation. According to the Melitopol mayor Ivan Fedorov, Russian authorities in occupied Melitopol have begun renaming streets named after famous Ukrainian figures. Instead, the streets were given the names of famous Russian and Soviet figures. Sergei Menyailo, head of the Republic of North Ossetia, together with Russian propagandists of the TASS news agency and Channel 1 Russia, have come under fire on the territory of Zaporizhia Oblast. This happened during a visit to positions of the Ossetian volunteer units and the Republic's mobilized fighters. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. The president of Russia and Belarus had a phone conversation today. Topics discussed were the arrangement of a meeting between the presidents and further actions within the framework of the Union State to ensure the security of the two countries. The former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennet has stated that prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin assured him that Russia had no plans to kill Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Since drones are becoming more and more important in modern warfare, Russia has reportedly begun to develop a friend or foe identification system for small drones. Igor Mangushev, a Russian mercenary famous for holding up a skull, allegedly belonging to an Azovstal defender, during a speech, has been shot in the head execution style. It is alleged that Chechen forces are behind the attack, and according to Mark Galeotti, an expert on Russia, it could have been a proxy attack on Yevgeny Prigozhin, as he had close ties to Mangushev. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The head of European diplomacy, Josep Borrell, said that the issue of providing combat aircraft to Ukraine is not on the agenda yet. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has denied concerns that Germany's decision to provide Ukraine with Western tanks and allow such supplies to other allies will provoke the Kremlin to a new escalation. When asked if there is an agreement that Ukraine will not use Western weapons on Russian territory, Scholz said, "There is an agreement on this." And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. Over the last week, Russia has continued to make small advances in its attempt to encircle the Donbas town of Bakhmut. The MO3 and the H32, the two main roads into the city for Ukrainian defenders, are likely now both threatened by direct fire following the Russian advances. Earlier in the week, Wagner paramilitary forces highly likely seized a subordinate route which links Bakhmut to the town of Siversk. While multiple alternative cross-country supply routes remain available to Ukrainian forces, Bakhmut is increasingly isolated. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The researchers argue that Russia has not shown the capacity to sustain multiple major offensive operations at once. They concluded that Russia's decisive offensive operations are unlikely to target the city of Zaporizhia from the western Donetsk-Zaporizhia front line, as the Russian military continues to prepare for an offensive in western Luhansk Oblast. Russian forces are also intensifying attacks on Bakhmut while neglecting front lines around the city of Donetsk. Meanwhile, Russian sources have been claiming that Russian forces have been making territorial gains in Zaporizhia Oblast in late January. The analysts believe that these claims were likely an information operation aimed at dispersing Ukrainian forces ahead of the decisive offensive in the east. The institute also said that the Russian Ministry of Defense might be rushing to integrate and professionalize irregular forces into its conventional structures, while Chief of the Russian General Staff Army General Valery Gerasimov has the favor of Russian President Vladimir Putin. And to wrap up the news report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy continues to regroup in separate directions. The enemy concentrates its main efforts on conducting offensive operations in the Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Novopavlivka directions. During the day, the Russian occupiers launched 4 missile strikes, 2 of which hit the civilian infrastructure of the city of Kharkiv, as a result of which the 5-story building of the higher education institution was completely destroyed and 5 civilians were injured. 2 Russian missiles flew over the city of Drushchivka, Donetsk Oblast. There, 4 high-rise buildings and a kindergarten were damaged. 4 civilians were injured with varying degrees of severity. The enemy continues to attract medical personnel from Russia due to large-scale losses in Ukraine. Thus, in Pokrovsky, Luhansk region, on the territory of the local dispensary, a field hospital with Russian medical personnel and surgeons was deployed. In the city of Tokmak, Zaporizhia Oblast, the Russian occupation forces forcefully evict civilians from their homes in order to settle local collaborators who support the Russian occupation authorities and work as part of the enemy's so-called law enforcement agencies. The owners are ordered to leave their homes and move out into the streets. Russian occupiers are conducting searches in the settlement of Krinka, Kherson Oblast, with the aim of stealing boats, water engines and other equipment for moving by water from the civilian population. And that concludes today's report. Should you be interested in any of the articles I mentioned, I included links to them in the description. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.